Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, I post true crime content like this all the time. So if that's something you're interested in, hit that subscribe button, give it a like, put your notifications on, and you'll know when I upload more videos like this one. So today we're talking about the tragic case of Susan Smith. So the content warnings for this one are sexual assault, suicide attempts, and the murders of children. So if that's something you can't watch, then click out. I'll have a playlist. I have a playlist on my channel with more videos, so I'm sure you can find one there. So let's get on to the case. So, Susan Lee Vaughan was born in Union County, South Carolina on September 26, 1971, to her mother Linda and her father Harry Vaughan. I'll put the spelling on screen because I'm not 100% sure on how you say it. I'm just gonna... Anyway. She was the only daughter of Harry and Linda. She had two older brothers. At age 6 or 7, Susan's parents decided to get a divorce. Linda managed to get over the divorce pretty quickly and remarried. However, 5 weeks after the divorce, Susan's father Harry sadly took his own life. Linda's new husband, so Susan's stepfather, was a man named Bev Russell. Bev was a former Republican Party Executive Committee member and was a member of the Christian Coalition and had connections within politics. With their new stepfather, Susan and her brothers grew up in a financially stable home. Susan was described to be a pretty sad kid, but she was very good at hiding it. She was heavily involved in extracurricular activities and was voted to be as the friendliest female by her classmates in senior year. At the age of 13, Susan attempted to take her own life, but this was a very well hidden secret. When Susan was a teenager, this is when her stepfather, Bev, decided to start molesting her. Disgusting. Susan told her school counsellor about it, who got in contact with social services, who removed Bev from the family home. Linda was upset, but not at Bev, but at Susan. She was upset that Susan had spoken up about her abuse and reprimanded her because she didn't want her to ruin her family's reputation in the community, which... Why is she more bothered about that than her own daughter's well-being? But so, because of no proper punishment, it was soon decided that Bev was allowed to move back into the family home. This meant that Susan's sexual abuse continued. In 1988, Susan got a job at Winn-Dixie, which is a grocery store. Work, she began having an affair with a married man, and she was 17 at the time, so the legal age in South Carolina is or was 16 at the time, so technically she was allowed to, but you're not really supposed to go for married people. Susan soon fell pregnant and she decided to get an abortion. It was at this time that her boyfriend, and I say boyfriend very loosely because he was a married man, but anyways, he decided to end the situationship with Susan. I'm calling it a situationship. Susan was so upset about the breakdown of this relationship that she tried to take her own life again by overdosing on aspirin and Tylenol. And remember, Susan is still being sexually abused by her stepfather at this point. This is the point where Susan begins a new relationship with an older co-worker who was named David Smith. Susan and David were former high school classmates, even though David was a couple of years older. David was also engaged at this point to a woman who wasn't Susan. David had a fiancée and his side piece Susan. Susan really likes to go for people, she likes to go for taken people. David decided that he really liked Susan and he decided to end his relationship with his fiancée to be able to continue the relationship with Susan. Not long after this, Susan falls pregnant again. So what they decide to do is they get married. March 1991, Susan and David get married, making Susan Vaughn now Susan Smith. They move into the house of David's great-grandmother. David's brother had recently died of complications to Crohn's disease, so obviously his parents were pretty mortified. This is when David's father also attempts to take his own life. His mother had moved out of the town to escape the grief of losing her son. Susan was kind of used to this lifestyle due to her traumatic upbringing, and she and David really bonded and used their experiences to comfort one another. On October 10th, 1991, Susan gives birth to their first child, a son named Michael Daniel Smith. Being a first-time parent, Susan, she liked to spoil her son, which she was spending money that she did not have. Susan's mother, Linda, was heavily involved in raising Michael. She helped financially, and David found that Linda was a bit intrusive in their relationship, and he felt like she was just interfering with his and Susan's marriage. Shortly before Michael's first birthday, his parents, David and Susan Smith, decided that they were going to separate. They spent the next year trying to change and fix their relationship. However, Susan was seeing other men, which made it pretty difficult to reconcile the relationship. Susan then fell pregnant again with her and David's second child, and their family reconciled, and then they moved back in together. Anyway, Susan says she felt emotionally distanced towards David, as their relationship had taken quite some strain and it was very damaged. On August 5th, 1993, Alexander Tyler Smith was born, and at this point the marriage between Susan and David was a done deal. It was well and truly over. So Susan decided that she was going to leave her job at Winn-Dixie so she didn't have to work with David anymore. She found a new job at Conso Products, which is a furniture accessories company and was also the biggest employer in the area. Susan was a bookkeeper at the company and then was later promoted to be the executive assistant for the CEO and the president of the company, J. Carey Findlay. October 25th, 1994, at around 9:15 p.m, Susan, who was aged 23 at this point, was driving with her two sons, Michael and Alexander. Michael was aged 3 and Alexander was just over the age of 1 at the age of 14 months. They stopped at a red light on the Highway 49 in Union, South Carolina. A young black man, armed with a gun, breaks into the car and demands for Susan to drive away. She says he then made her stop the car a few miles away, kicked Susan out of the car, and then sped away with her 2 children strapped in the back of the car. Susan ran to the nearest house she could find and called for help. The police conducted immediate searches for the boys, and then the media spread the story across every news channel. Both Susan and David made news appeals, begging for the safe return of their sons Alexander and Michael. They were both very complicit and cooperative with the police detectives.
There's not a lot more than you can do is take the complaints, follow up on them, develop your leads, develop your suspects, and rule them out one at a time.
They both took polygraph tests and went through several interviews.
We love our children very much, and we want them returned to us safe and sound.
By the morning, the news of the disappearance of the two boys had made it nationwide. David and Susan made several news appeals over the next 9 days, showing immense grief and just begging for the return of their children.
That they please bring them home to us where they belong. Your mama loves you so much, and your daddy and his whole family love you so much.
The police began to become very wary of Susan. Her behaviour and body language just seemed very suspicious to them. Small details within her story would change, which is a huge telltale sign of lying.
Told NBC that there were inconsistencies in your stories. Do you know what inconsistencies they were referring to?
No, ma'am, I really do not know that.
Susan says that the incident with the young black man had occurred at red lights behind Monarch Mill textile plant, but it was found that the lights would have always been on green and the red lights would only activate if a car was coming in the opposite direction that Susan was coming in. Sheriff Howard Wells was from the Union County Police Department was very suspicious of her. He decided to lie to Susan and told her that there was CCTV surveillance footage of the lights and that it contradicted Susan's story. And luckily for, well, the investigation, this technique worked in Sheriff Wells' favour as Susan Smith broke. Susan asked Howard Wells to pray with her, and then she started to talk about what had really happened. She tells the sheriff that the whole carjacking story was made up and that the real story was that she had let her car roll into the John D. Lake with both of her kids still strapped in their car seats. We're gonna rewind a bit now. Susan's salary at this point in her new job was about $17,000, which in today's money is about $30,000. This was decently high for the area at the time, so Susan would work with and encounter more upper-class individuals. Susan was noticed by Mr. J. Carey Finley's son, Tom. On October 15th, Susan and Tom were partying together at Tom's father's 13-acre estate. Things got a bit steamy, if you know what I mean, and Susan had caught the feels for Tom. However, Tom only saw it as a fling. Tom didn't want kids, and obviously Susan had 2 kids, so that put him off. Tom made it very clear that he wasn't interested in pursuing anything with Susan and broke their situationship off again, I guess. He sent her a long typed letter which he had typed up on his computer. So on October 25th, Susan takes her kids to daycare and then drives to work. As the day goes on, Susan becomes more and more agitated and more upset over Tom's rejection. She left work early that day and went to Tom's office to try and guilt trip him into taking her back. It didn't work. Divers were sent to search the John D. Long Lake, and Susan's maroon Mazda was found upside down in the water. A diver said that he knew it was the right car because when he was swimming, he put his flashlight up and he saw a little hand pressed up against the glass. The letter Tom had sent to Susan was found inside her car, and it dated to October 17th, 1994. In this letter it says, quote, "Without a doubt you'll make some lucky man a great wife, but unfortunately it won't be me," end quote. And another very important quote from this letter is, "Like I have told you before, there are some things about you that aren't suited for me. And yes, I'm speaking about your children." I'm sure your kids are good kids, but it wouldn't really matter how good they may be. The fact is, I just don't want children." End quote. This letter is believed by many people to have planted something in Susan's head, saying that she would be able to be with Tom if her kids were out of the picture. Susan claims that this false story about a black man kidnapping her kids had absolutely nothing to do with race, which I call bull. And her brother called the implication of race a terrible misfortune. What do you mean? If she thought that the most believable story was a black man, if she thought that the most believable story she could come up with was a black man abducting her kids, then she's a racist, plain and simple. Susan Smith was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months.
Her 10-day trial began on July 18th, 1995. The defence for Susan heavily relied on the fact of mental illness. They needed a diagnosis of dependent personality disorder. The defence say that Susan's father's suicide, her suicide attempts, and her molestation by her stepfather were all contributing factors as to why Susan killed her kids. They say Susan drove to the lake to kill herself and her kids, but she backed out at the last minute and she didn't have time to save her children. Now, I do believe that all those, like her molestation, her previous suicide attempts, her father's suicide attempts, would have contributed, but it's only a contribution, it's not like the whole picture. All those things didn't mean she would have done it regardless of, like, I feel like she would have done it just so she could be with Tom. Anyway. Her written confession, she says she was in the car and jumped out and had a nervous breakdown. When her car had rolled into the water, she ran to get help. Bev Russell testified and took to the stand in court and confirmed Susan's claims of sexual assault on his part. He claims that he had molested her in the teen years, but as she got older, they were in a consensual relationship. Like, she's your stepdaughter. I personally don't think it was a consensual relationship, but he can believe what he wants. He also said, quote, "Had I known the result of my sin, then I would have mustered the strength to behave accordingly to my responsibility," end quote. Whatever that means. So, if he knew his grandsons would have died, he wouldn't have molested her. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Anyway, the jury deliberated for 2.5 hours and found Susan Lee Smith guilty on 2 counts of murder. At the sentencing hearing, a reenactment of the sinking car was shown. It had taken 6 minutes for the car to fully submerge, which meant Susan had stood there for 6 minutes while her car was sinking and her children were dying. That's 6 minutes where she could have jumped in and saved her children. Susan Smith managed to dodge the death penalty and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 30 years. In 2015, Susan Smith said, quote, In 2015, Susan said this, quote, "I am not the monster society thinks I am. I am very far from it. Something went very wrong that night. I was not myself. I was a good mother. and I loved my boys. The thing that hurts me the most is that people think I hurt my children in order to be with a man. That is so far from the truth. There was no motive, as this was not a planned event. I was not in my right mind. The only reason I lied is because I didn't know how to tell the people who loved Michael and Alexander that they would never see them again. I had planned to kill myself first and leave the note behind, telling what had happened. I didn't believe I could face my family when the truth was revealed. This is a small piece of the story, but I did want to tell you that if you're ever interested in doing another article, please let me know. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Sincerely, Susan. End quote. What do you mean? Like, you're most worried about, the thing that hurts you the most is that people think you killed your kids to be with a man? Honey, you did. You killed your kids to be with a man. How else can it be explained? Susan is locked up at South Carolina's Women Correctional Center in Columbia, still in South Carolina. During her incarceration, she's not been on her best behavior. She has had sexual relations with 2 guards. Both of them received punishment for that. She's also been found with drugs and other prison rule violations. Now, this is the end of the case, but there's even more tragedy in the following years. So, there's even more deaths relating to this case. In September of 1996, a family was visiting the memorial for Michael and Alexander at John D. Long Lake. The car was parked on the boat ramp, and the 4 kids and the father were in the car. The mother had stepped out of the car when the car started rolling down the slope into the water. The mother jumped into the water to save her family, but unfortunately she drowned. Another adult who was with the family also jumped in the water, and unfortunately they also drowned. So altogether, 7 people died in this accident. The 4 kids in the car, the father in the car, then the 2 adults who jumped in. In 1997, fortunately, the boat ramp was destroyed. In 2010, Susan tried to have her conviction overturned, and she represented herself as her own counsel. She tried to have it overturned based on her Amanda rights, which is Miranda rights, but whatever, being violated, and she was coerced into making a confession with no lawyer present. Susan Smith will be eligible for parole on November 4th, 2024, so that's 2 years away. And it's said that Susan is now on her best behaviour now to maximise her possibility of being released. So this is a really sad case. Leave your thoughts and comments down below. I want to see what you think. If you enjoyed, give it a like. I have a case request form down below where you can submit your case request. I have a podcast on Spotify. I've not posted on it. I've been saying it for videos and videos. I'll get on it eventually. There's going to be a playlist on the end of this video of more true crime videos. I'm going to put a circle on here with my face on it, and you can click that to subscribe. Alright, bye. See you in my next video.